And Doug, may I kick off with you, my friend?
Thank you very much, Jane. Thank you, Ignite Movement, for the opportunity to participate today. I'm Doug Kirkpatrick. I've been fortunate to have been able to spend the last 3 decades in a self-managed enterprise, seeing it grow from zero to the world's largest company in its industry. I'm currently a Forbes speaker, an author, and an organizational consultant and evangelist for the better workplaces of the future. What matters most to me is to create workplaces that are vibrant, that are great, that allow people to flourish and to realize their fullest potential. Thank you.
Thank you. And Vivian.
Hi, Jane. Thank you for having me as well. And also Ignite Movement, thank you for having me. My name is Vivian Acquah, and my son Orlando, who's at the moment 7, is the main reason of why I am a workplace wellness advocate. But I'm also advocating for amplifying for diversity, equity, and inclusion. So I advise managers on how they can keep their people healthy and safe, mainly because I have a promise that I have towards my son to create a workplace where everybody can be themselves. And what I'm mostly passionate about is amplifying diversity, equity, inclusion in the workplace so that everybody can belong in the workplace.
Beautiful, thank you. And Rashita.
Hi, thank you, Jane, and thank you, Ignite, for having me here today. I'm very honored and very excited. So I'm Rishita Jones. I am based in Amsterdam in the Netherlands. So who am I? First and foremost, I am a human of the world. I am also a very proud wife and mother of 2. I'm a very proud and blessed daughter and sister. My life's mission or my life's path is to always shine the light on everybody that I come across, always add value to others. And my life's purpose is to create happier, healthier, and more sustainable organizations. Because what matters most to me is to ensure that I'm leaving a better legacy behind for my children to inherit. I am here to humanize the workplace. Thank you.
Thank you, Rashita. And Tom.
Hello, everybody. So my name is Tom, and I'm not so fluently like the speakers before telling where everything is about, but I will do it very short, in a very short way. So my main goal is to change finance, so the financial sector, and I will talk about that later on. Then the second thing is by sharing how we build a company, it's about changing work. That's the second goal. And the third goal is to get back to multi-stakeholder capitalism, which, let's say, since the 80s has gone in a wrong direction and has went into out of balance, so to say. So these are my 3 main goals.
Wonderful. Thank you, Tom. And so to get the conversation started today, I'd love to start with an opening question, and which will then feed into these questions you've kindly put up onto Slido. And the opening question, I wonder, Doug, if you could reflect first on this for us. And the question is, based on your experience, what are the key factors to creating environments in which people want to work?
So I think the key factors are 2. One is that leaders have to give up power. Leaders have to relinquish power to others in the organization, including decision rights, the ability to influence others, the ability to expand work beyond one's predefined role. Leaders have to give up power, devolve power to others. Number 2, companies need to organize around simple, clear principles. And I enjoyed the talk earlier from Christophe, where he talked about a company constitution. And constitutions are beautiful things. The great thing about a constitution is that it should be fixed. And the fixed nature of a constitution is what allows human beings to be free. So I would say two things: give up power and organize around simple, clear principles.
Thank you. And Tom, I wondered if there's anything more that you wanted to build on that, given in your organization you've introduced democracy, which again, Christoph talked about previously.
Yeah, it's, I mean, he already explained holacracy, but I would just add to Dr. Kirkpatrick in a very, let's say, simple way. We have, for instance, only one rule. We have only the golden rule. So treat others like you want to be treated yourself. That's all, full stop. So it's especially about how do you implement the whole stuff, because there's an enormous amount of theory and I also have a more or less academic background, but in the end, it's about how do you really implement this in organizations and then to scale up these things. So probably, let's say everybody who's interested in those talks know more or less what holacracy is. But then the question is, and that's what you also get, let's say the questions you get is about transparency, it's about salaries, it's about how do you implement, let's say, development programs, etc. So you should really try to keep it so practical that really others also can implement it.
So what I'm hearing is this sort of practical nature and keeping things simple and clear so people feel they have that opportunity to really maximize their contribution. What if we shift over to one of these questions now, and building on that piece around what is it that leaders and how do we need to create structures in which people want to come to work? Rashita, I wondered if you might look at this one too with your experience in how do we build sustainable workplace behaviors based on your HR experience and implementing processes and systems that create this sustainability. What are your thoughts?
Thank you, Jane. So sustainability is usually a big issue when it comes to making innovative changes in organizations, because we normally only have the short-term thinking in mind, and we don't realize that actually, you know, we want to build sustainable change because we want to be long-term. And when it comes to people and behaviors, because the question is really about behaviors, how do we make the behavior sustainable? It's really about breaking it down, actually also keeping things simple, but primarily to understand human behavior. You know, people are motivated to do things when they're fun. So make it fun, keep it simple, keep it motivating. Our brains have very limited capacity, you know, to process information. There's so much we can do. So again, keep it simple. Start small and always show momentum. Make the effects real. That's also really important. And show people that they're proud of something bigger than themselves. That's also the other issue that we have often, is that we don't really explain the why. Why are we doing this? Why is this important? What's in it for me? So really show that they're part of something much bigger, and remind people of the values. You know, what are their values? What are our values? What are our combined values? And ultimately, you know, what makes change sustainable? What makes this innovation sustainable? Because that's what it's all about now. It's about ensuring that we have continuous feedback loops in all of our processes and systems, that we're continuously listening, learning, and improving.
Well, thank you. And Vivian, I'm wondering if there's more that you would like to add to that, again, bearing in mind your perspective for the corporate well-being within organizations. What do you think?
Well, not to give a lot away, but to build upon what Rashida already shared is I want leaders to lead, to be an example for their leaders, because especially now during this lockdown, some people maybe find it challenging to share their personal journey or to share the challenges that they're going through, right? So I would say include, you know, psychological safety within the company, include psychological safety within the team, so that people are able to share if there are any challenges that they are facing at the moment. Maybe they've lost a lost one, or maybe they're going through financial stress at the moment. It's those things that we need to address before people end up in quicksand.
Mm. And dealing with some of those challenges, I'm wondering, this question here that the audience have put, it's a great question. This first one around how do you handle career ambitions and conflict in a self-organized company? And again, based on your experience, Tom, I wondered if you wanted to take the lead on this one.
If I want to take the lead on that one.
How do you handle career ambitions and conflicts in a self-organized company?
Oh, I will speak afterwards on that, but just to give you a very short answer, it's just an enormous complex puzzle of a lot of different pieces. So just to take the example of psychological safety, you can do a lot of teaching about psychological safety, but if you don't have a safe environment, so if you have, for instance, a hire and fire culture, just to take a really a problem of society, then it's very difficult to organize this. So for me, it always starts with structures and balances and kind of let's say checks and balances, and then you build the structure, and the structure creates a kind of behavior, and that's what you for instance see. So you can also talk about, let's say, servant leadership, but if you have a, let's say, very horizontal a structure, or like the Swiss government, for instance, has, then you have a totally different way of leadership. So this whole mental box we're in is always about leadership. I would say it's not about bosses. Everybody should be a leader. Or it's not about a strong leader in a government. No, it should be a kind of equilibrium, like you, for instance, have in the Swiss government. But I will talk to that more in detail afterwards.
Okay, thank you. And for our listeners, you're going to be one of the keynotes coming up, which would be wonderful. Doug, I wonder if I might invite you to share your thoughts and experience on this too, in terms of how do you handle career ambitions and conflicts in a self-organized company?
So the pronoun you is interesting here because in the self-managed companies that I work with, people handle their own career ambitions and conflicts. And career ambitions and conflicts are really two different concepts. So let's address career ambitions first. In a truly self-organized enterprise where someone has a fairly well-defined role and wants to transition into a completely different role, that's perfectly okay. As long as they can chart a path from point A to point B and find a willing mentor who will help them achieve success on that journey. And in a self-organized company, no one's going to mentor anyone unless there's a reasonable foreseeability of success in the mentorship. And so in the companies I work with, that happens. People work out agreements between themselves as individual peers. They work out pathways to achieve a career ambition. And so that's how it works. Conflicts can be handled in a very simple, principle-centered way. So 30 years ago at Morningstar, we implemented a process called gaining agreement. And it simply says, if you have a dispute or conflict with another individual, it's your responsibility as an adult to address that issue directly with the other individual. And everything is achieved through request and response. So you make a request for change. The other person can respond in one of three ways. They can agree, disagree, or you can work out a third option. If you still believe in your request and the person still or disagrees and you still believe in your request, you can escalate to a mediation step and then a group mediation step and ultimately an arbitration step, which is the final binding decision by an arbitrator. So this is not a new process. It's been around for thousands of years. It's a way to resolve any conflict between any individuals in any group setting. And it's worked successfully for 3 decades now at Morningstar.
Thank you, Doug. And Vivian, I wondered if I might bring you in here too, with the lens of inclusion. You know, what's your experience of helping organizations create processes and policies around ensuring that people feel included as they navigate their career in self-managed organizations?
Definitely. I can build only upon what Doug already shared. So Doug mentioned something about mentoring, and mentoring is one of the key elements of increasing diversity, of building that inclusion. Mentoring doesn't stop, only for those who are just joining the company. Everybody can be mentored, right? So you can always implement reverse mentoring, or you can implement different mentoring groups, or create a mentoring group for those who just joined the company. As long as the company really pays, pays the work, does an effort to implement mentoring groups, but also increase the mentorships within the company, because the last thing that you want to do is have somebody working for you for 5 years and that person is leaving the company because they feel excluded. Whilst with a mentoring program in place where you can share knowledge, but also open insights upon each other's culture, so that we can learn to open our eyes, we can learn to create a greater lens, and we can learn to understand each other.
Lovely. And what do you think about sponsorship, building on the idea of mentoring?
I say do it, especially for the people who are minorities, or especially for the people of color. I know that the sponsorship is a heavy load. It's the heavy level of, it's a deeper level of mentorship, but we need it. If your company is saying that we need to include people, we need to include diversity within the company, why not encourage them to go a step further and become sponsors? But then again, it's not only a responsibility of the company, it's also the responsibility of the mentor to of the mentee to nurture that relationship that they have with a mentor, so that they can become sponsors. Because you have to see that a mentor is opening, their whole Rolodex for you, right? And that's not something that you do if somebody doesn't pay the work, or if somebody doesn't do the work.
So if I may, I'd love just to broaden this out a little. We're talking about some of the structures and some of the processes that we seek to, capitalize on the motivation of individuals so that they feel inspired at work. And Rashita, I may, if I come to you, to ask your experience of what are some of the more traditional HR processes. And there's a question here about salary, for example. So some of the more traditional HR processes, compensation, hiring, or development, that in your experience are different with purpose-driven organizations. How do they show up differently with purpose-driven organizations?
Thank you, Jane. HR typically, or traditional HR, was put in place back in the day, in the time of the Taylorist area, to really keep the parts of the different machines working and working well, smoothly, efficiently. And as we move away from that to the sort of, to the knowledge era, the participative era, which is where we find ourselves now, the need of organizations is really to increase collaboration, speed, to be closer to the customer who makes decisions. And purpose-driven HR practices put the employee at the center of what we do. And the main difference is that we're moving away from that sort of teaching and telling style, this whole, not allowing people to think for themselves. We've typically not treated our employees as adults. And we're moving away from that to involving them in our decision making. And to give a sort of a particular example of perhaps one of the differences, it's, let's say, if we approach recruitment and how typically recruitment happens, is that a vacancy is identified, whether due to attrition or a new role. A hiring manager and HR come together and they sort of put together a job description, with a summary, bullet points of all the descriptions, the role descriptions, followed by experience that is required and desirable skills, competencies, and education. Now, when you put things like this in place, you're putting people into a box. And have you ever heard someone say to you, well, I'm not doing that because it's not part of my job description? Well, I have, and I have often heard this saying. So when we hire based on such prescriptive details, what we're taking away is that innovation, that flexibility, and the requirement to really think about the value that you add. So one of the main things that we do in purpose-driven HR practices is to hire for value. and and what is the value that you bring to this role and to this department or to this team. So you move away from job descriptions to roles and responsibilities, which are all based on value add. And moving on from that, typically performance management then as a result becomes more based on your strengths management as opposed to managing by weaknesses, which is also what happens a lot. Our performance management process, which is once a year and it's very sterile. And we're moving away from that to putting people to work on their skills, on their strengths and on their value add, and that's basically some of the biggest differences that you see.
Thank you. And what really speaks to me as you share that, Rashita, is the evolutionary nature. When we think about Teal organizations having one of the characteristics being this evolutionary purpose, is that the processes, reflect that as well. And that's as human beings, we, continue to evolve and we're not static machines. Moving on then to the larger organizations, there's a question here around, thank you, Kathy, for sharing this one. How can big organizations, something like Credit Suisse, for example, function more like a B Corp? And Tom, I wondered if I could invite you with your finance background as well to share, what are your thoughts on that question? How can big organizations such as Credit Suisse function more like a B Corp?
Just to give me the simple one, that's not so easy to answer. I mean, I can give you two answers. The one is that, for instance, in the Netherlands, all the big banks visited us, and they are, especially after the last financial crisis, where most banks had been saved by the government or by the taxpayer, there was really a change going on. If you talk, for instance, about salary schemes, so that was changed. And what for instance also happened was that, for instance, ING, which let's say was very successful in the first online bank with ING Direct in the past before the financial crisis, they went to Teal years ago. So it is possible to change those huge companies, but it's not so easy. So I would say you really have to think about what you want to achieve, what kind of possibilities you have, what kind of stakeholders you have, and then there are really a lot of different options. So let's say on the one hand you have discussions of banks going back to kind of cooperative. In Switzerland you would say Raiffeisen kind of structure. Then on the other hand, you can talk to your shareholders, like Unilever did with Pullman in the beginning. So, but that's, I mean, you can probably talk for hours on the different alternatives you have as a huge big corporation.
Sounds like it would be fun for us to see some case studies of these big organizations and how they have transformed and made that transition. And Doug, I wondered if
I could just give you one extreme example. That's 2 weeks ago, I spoke at a Hire conference. So if people are really interested in that, then I would say Google Hire, Rendaye model, because they split up 90,000 people in 4,000 micro enterprises. But that's really a huge topic for a whole conference. So I will just leave it with that.
Thank you. So Doug, if I might invite you with your consulting hat on as well, what are some of the challenges that you have seen as organizations shift or want to move towards a more self-managed organization?
So I think the biggest challenge is management class that does not want to give up power. So even though you may have a CEO who is visionary and sees a path or has a vision for a desired future state and is inviting his or her management class into that journey, there is often a lot of resistance, like antibodies are formed, and people don't want to give up power. And there's some neuroscience behind this. Ian Robertson in the UK wrote a book called The Winner Effect, How Power Affects Your Brain. and he describes how people get a shot at dopamine in the brain when they exercise command authority. Dr. Keltner, PhD in psychology out here at the University of California, has done studies on leader behavior in different power dynamic situations, and he found that leaders actually have their etiquette and manners degrade when they're feeling particularly powerful. So it's a real challenge, and our entire business education system is oriented toward helping people acquire prestige and perks and power and climb a career ladder. And that is not particularly congruent with establishing and sustaining a self-managed enterprise. So I think that is probably the largest challenge, and it ties directly into the first question about, what are the key things that we have to consider with these kinds of organizations.
I have a burning question for you and anyone on the panel, which is around this notion, and I think our first speaker spoke about it today, around what do we need to bring into higher education? How do we need to prepare our students, some of those listening today, for the future of work in relation to what you've just said? What is it we need to offer them to be thinking about as they navigate coming into the workplace?
Is that for me, Jane, or?
Yeah, start with yourself, Doug, and then I'd love to include.
Okay. I think we need to get back to focus on the humanities, and in particular philosophy. I was pleased to hear Ernst earlier refer to Immanuel Kant, who described the condition of free will. And we know that human beings have free will because for every choice we make, we could have chosen to do something else. So all of us who are on this Zoom call today have chosen to be here. No one forced us to be here. And we could have chosen to be somewhere else. So people have free will. And if you believe in free will, then you should believe in self-managed organizations, because it's no one's job to motivate anyone else. People are either going to exercise their free will and motivate themselves or not. And it's no one's job to train, develop, or motivate or improve anyone else. It's the individual's responsibility to take care of those things as a holder of free will. So we need to get back to the humanities, and we need to recognize the human condition, which is one of nonstop anxiety. And anxiety is pure energy. It either releases itself in ways that are constructive or destructive. And so it's a job of every human being to channel his or her anxiety in ways that are productive and moves them forward as an individual and helps their organizations get better at the same time.
Beautiful. Vivian, thank you. I'd love to invite your thoughts on this question.
I want to build upon what Doug already shared. So I would definitely encourage all the students that are watching today to invest in knowing yourself. And knowing yourself is not that you just know what your strengths are, right? But also ask your friends, also ask your coworkers to share their experience about you. So know your hidden talents, know your strengths, because from there on, knowing yourself, you'll know what kind of added value you have for the company. I know that this situation that we're having now, the lockdown and this whole COVID situation has brought upon us that, there is a different war going on. Now it's like everybody, is fighting for a job or fighting for a position. But remember a few months ago or last year, we were in a position that there was war for talent. And I believe that once once the dust is settled, that's when the time will come. So know your value, invest in your personal development, invest in your professional development, and don't be afraid to ask for a mentor. So if you see a role model, approach them, ask them, invest your time in them. so that they can become your mentor and also have a valid reason of why you want to be mentored. I'm reading Unapologetically Ambitious. That's from Shelley Archambault, which is a book that is recently launched, and I'm already loving her story, her path. So really look into books that really can accelerate your growth.
What a beautiful message. Thank you. And building on Doug's, this whole idea of being self-directed, that we have our own responsibility to nurture our gifts and talents, and working in organizations that can see our value and want us to contribute. Thank you. I'm conscious of a couple of other questions that have arisen through the Slido, and I would love to ask this question. And Tom, may I invite you to share this one around, how would you define the success of a company if monetary targets are no longer an option? On what basis would you compare companies? What are your thoughts on that? How would you define the success of a company if monetary targets are no longer an option?
Oh, that's I find it very easy question, but no, it's just it's a little joke. But I would say if you would be able to have a kind of eternal company, which is purpose driven, then that would be, I would say, probably a goal a lot of people would support, because that's something which is interesting. So let's say companies are built and then they die afterwards. Why is that? And especially if they have a strong purpose, let's say research says that they have a higher chance of surviving or becoming older. So there's a lot of research done on that. So I would say this combination of keeping up the purpose, that's why I would call it eternal company. That would be, to my point of view, the target or the goal or the mission of the company.
Wonderful, thank you. And there was one other question that flicked up, I saw. It's not there now, but it did come up on the Slido. And this was a question around trust. And I don't know how it was phrased exactly, but it's something that's emerging as we're sharing our thoughts and ideas on both the structures of self-managed organizations and also the processes that we can employ. So Rashita, may I invite you to share on this one around what is your experience? What are some of the ways that we can generate trust within purpose-driven, self-organized organizations? What are your thoughts?
Transparency is the number one thing. You know, what we have in traditional way of managing is really information flows top down only. Everything is on a need to know basis, or it's only revealed after an event. But in purpose-driven organizations, in HR practices which are purpose-driven, information flows freely up and down, bottom up, you know, as well as top down. So really that is the beginning point of that, is transparency. And also, you know, it's also to ensure that there isn't sort of a mismatch or between what we say and what we do, which is one of the biggest things that I see, is this misalignment and structure and culture misfit, which happens quite a lot. So it's the whole window dressing. So this is what I want to do. This is what I'd like us to do, but this is actually what we do in reality. So if anyone is serious about making change and making change be sustainable and last, you have to review your entire organization from a structure, culture, and strategic objective, and make sure that they all come together and align. So that's the starting point.
Lovely. Transparency. That's been a real theme actually throughout our keynotes today. Thank you for anchoring that with that whole process. There's another question that was arisen earlier, which was building on this area of diversity and inclusion. And Vivian, if I might invite you into this, and what is your experience of when leaders fail? You know, what are the things that sometimes leaders fail or overlook in developing a more inclusive culture, in your experience, and diverse culture?
Seeing the person, seeing the individual for the unique values or the unique talents that they have, because everybody is diverse, everybody has unique items to bring. And from the moment that the leader is not amplifying their unique talents or not approaching their uniqueness and creating that environment that where, you know, everybody's copying everybody, that's when I see things going wrong. So I want to encourage all leaders, but also future leaders, self-leaders, to really think about the following question, and that is, what can I do to amplify diversity in my own surrounding? You don't have to be a leader to boost diversity and inclusion in your workplace. You can be a self-leader.
Beautiful. And I guess we all are, you know, whether we've been in a leadership position or not, if we're leading our lives, starts with us, hey?
Yeah.
So friends, I'm conscious of our time, and as we're beginning to bring our discussion, been so valuable. I'm thrilled and thank you for the listeners today with their super questions and you sharing your wisdom, your insights and your experiences. I would love to finish off by inviting each of you to share an answer to this question. You know, what is your message to our listeners today, so students and those in organizations, as they either prepare to enter the world of work or they navigate the world of work? What is the message that you would like to leave our listeners with today? And if I could start with you, Doug.
Thank you, Jane. The message I would like to leave is that it is absolutely possible to build a human-centric enterprise that scales infinitely. It's possible to organize around simple, clear principles based on commitments by and between individuals in a network of collective intelligence that has absolutely no inherent barriers to scale. And so I've lived that, I've experienced it, I've seen it. There are other examples in the world of that happening. It is absolutely possible to build beautiful human-centric enterprises that scale.
Wow, that's inspiring. Thank you. So Vivian, may I invite you to follow? What's the message?
I would like to add upon what Doug shared, and that is, how can you as an individual start amplifying diversity, equity, and inclusion from today? So create an environment where you reach out to a person who is diverse from you. It doesn't have to be a person of color, just a person who is diverse from you, and reach out and give them an ear, give them a listening ear, saying, how can I support you and how can I amplify you in whatever way that you want to be amplified? Because that's, you know, that's a good way to create impact, but also it's a self-fulfilling way for yourself whilst you're paying it forward.
Beautiful, thank you. I love that, amplify others. And Tom, what would be your message to our listeners today?
3 things. I would say first is think with the end in mind. Take the book of Stephen Covey. That's always good. It's also, if you want to have goals, you start with the goal and then you make the steps back, but think with the end in mind of your life. Then the second thing would be to ask people who are really old, because they give you honest answers and other people don't. And the third thing would be read more philosophy and less economic books.
Good.
Wonderful. And Rashita, what would be your message to our listeners today?
I think my main message is to ask yourself whether you're building a service, a product, or a vision. Ask yourself the question, will this help other people improve their lives? You know, will we enable other people to succeed? Because when we start building capabilities, you know, that create value for others, and we do this continuously, then we're creating a never-ending process that generates improvement and exponential growth, and it's sustainable. So it's really about creating virtuous cycle of mutual benefit. That's one thing that I'll leave you with.
Wonderful. And just as we've been wrapping up, it seems there's a burning question because somebody else has asked it. And so if I could ask just one last question, this is the one, is what do you think about open salary lists in a self-organized and big companies. Doug, can I invite you to share that one with your experience? What do you think about open salary lists in self-organized and big companies?
I think my answer may be a little surprising. I have no thoughts about this. I really don't. I'm completely agnostic on this topic. If it fits the culture of a company and it makes sense, great. If it doesn't, don't. I'm not sure exactly. I mean, yeah, it's more transparent, but is it really creating value for individuals in the enterprise? That would be the question.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, all of you, for your contributions. And I would love to say to all of our listeners today, if they would love to connect with you more, if it's okay,